Hi, I'm Matt Randall. I've been a 3D modeler for about 20 years. This video is probably the first in a series where we can talk about how to open up other opportunities with a 3D modeling skill set. The series is going to be about money. No, seeing if we can actually create objects or downloadables or send people files or printed objects in 3D, digitally fabricated. We're going to see if we can build a portfolio, what it might take to build that portfolio, what surrounding support that portfolio needs. Is it additional advertising or marketing? How much commercial activity can we actually get out of this portfolio? And try and answer the question of, is this a viable way of doing things? So in previous videos I'd said I'd do some speed modeling challenges, and I think this is what this series is going to be. It's not going to be only about the commercial aspects of this process. It's going to be about the actual skills that you can build and are needed to enable this to happen. So the first project I'm going to do is a vinyl record wall mount bracket. Because they have such great cover art, slightly older people like me tend to treat them a bit as trophies and want to display them. So the idea would be to create these wall mount brackets which could allow you to display the vinyl records in a tile kind of arrangement on a wall in a study or in a man cave or similar. So how we're going to go about this is I'm going to minimize myself for a while and record my screen. We're going to be designing something in Blender 3D, which is going to start with AI generated images. I'm not super interested in AI, so I won't share any of the prompts or anything like that. So this is going to be mainly about the 3D modeling process. It'll be sped up, but I'll talk you through what I'm doing in terms of using the features and what the intention of using each tool is. You can pause it and go back and study whatever you need to do if you wanted to follow along. From there, what we're going to do is upload the files to a site called Cults 3D. So the question might be, why is this called a speed modeling challenge? Well, there's two reasons. The first being I have a day job, so any effort I put into these challenges has got to be very fast. And the second is the visual playback of them is going to be super fast. They're going to look very much like a speed modeling challenge video. So without further ado, speed modeling challenge starts in 3, 2, 1. So we're going to start off making an L-channel bracket, which the record will actually sit in and be supported by. In Blender, I always start off with a simple plane and then move vertices around to create the shape of the actual object. In order to create beveled or chamfered edges, I normally use edge weights and the bevel modifier, and then starting to think about the holes for the little barrier which we need to create at the front to stop the vinyl record from falling forwards and off the bracket once it's on the wall. In this instance, I'm using the array modifier, starting off with a cuboid object and then patterning that and then making a subtractive boolean to create the actual holes. In order to create precise data entry, I normally turn on the vertex snaps, as well as using axis control snaps by typing X, Y or Z and then a specific dimensional value into the number pad. Now creating some countersink screw holes, I used the circle tool and then extrude tapered sections in order to create a cylindrical object, and then using the array tool to create a patterned boolean subtraction again. Now I'm thinking about doing some tidy ups using the bevel modifier again to create some fillets in the sharp edges. I noticed that the fillet process was not creating some clean geometry at the end, so I had to go and bake the thickness into the part by applying the thicken or solidify modifier and then using a mesh cleanup tool called merge vertices to make sure there was no non-manifold geometry. Now starting to model the barrier arm itself, I start off by creating some pins which fit into the holes which were created in the L-shaped bracket, again using the array modifier to create multiple pins. You'll notice that I made a little offset with the size of the pin in the hole. Normally with 3D printing you need to create a tolerance of about 0.2 or 0.3 of a millimeter. This can change according to many factors, including the temperature, the layer height and the nozzle size. Now creating an extrusion for the barrier arm and extending it to the ends of the bracket. Now I'm removing the central screw, instead shifting the screw hole to one of the sides and then mirroring it. Coming back to the model a bit later, I thought perhaps we can change the width of it and create effectively a module of the size of a vinyl record, and as such make the tiling on the wall easier to lay out both in the horizontal and vertical dimensions. Working on the bracket arm itself, I discovered that the pinholes could actually connect between two brackets if you put them side by side and therefore create a really accurate layout. For the vertical, because the brackets are half a vinyl record width long, you could put them 90 degrees trees on the wall while you're making the drillings for the horizontal brackets, and therefore create the right vertical distance. Now a bit of footage of me printing prototypes. I find that I use my Ender 3 V3 SE for rapid prototyping with a larger nozzle, and my smaller, older Ender 3 V2 for detailed prints with a 0.2 nozzle. At the end of this video I will show the printed prototypes of the bracket and the barrier arm, along with the outcomes of the next sections, which are about creating stylized text of the phrase "now playing," which are inspired by combining band logos from different metal genres. Yes, the background images are created from AI prompts. The first version here is a thrash metal one, aiming to combine logos such as Slayer and Anthrax. This first one in particular did not change too much from the inspiration image. Importing the image as a plane, I started off by scaling it to about the right size relative to the bracket, and then going through and creating vertex extrusions and regions which could be solidified, and going through letter by letter until I was completed. In Blender, what you can do to stop geometry moving in the wrong axis is constrain the transform to a plane, and the way that you do that is by hitting G for transform or S for scale, and then Shift plus the axis X, Y or Z key to denote the plane that you want to constrain to. The plane that you constrain to is perpendicular to the axis that you nominate. So if I wanted to constrain to the XY plane, what I'd do is I'd hit G for transform and then Shift Z, because the XY plane is perpendicular to the Z axis. Now I'm attaching the bracket into this model, which means I can align the text with the actual bracket itself, and then anticipate how I'm going to attach the pins to the main text objects so that it can be mounted and stay vertical inside the bracket. This involves including all of the pins which are possible to insert the text object into the bracket with. From there I'll select a few which line up to more vertical elements within the text itself, so there's a rigidity in the final model. Now I'm getting ready to make the main extrusions for the text objects. What I found was some of the face normals were actually facing the wrong way, which made it offset in the wrong direction. In a second you can see that with the blue and red colouring. So correcting those normals made the solid offset in the correct dimension and make them all sit in the same spatial alignment. Now the next thing I wanted to do was make a little inset or chamfer on the objects, just to give a bit more dimensionality. The first thing I tried was using the bevel modifier, but for a chamfer rather than a fillet. The way to do an inset in Blender is to have the objects in edit mode, select the face and hit the I button, and then type in a parameter or a dimension to actually do the inset by. It takes the object and evenly insets the edges rather than scaling, so I decided to go for an inset and create separate objects to be extruded, and this gave the opportunity for it to be a different colour. Now I have a new wave of British heavy metal concept, which is the middle ground between the Judas Priest and Iron Maiden logo. The reference image was by no means optimal for what I wanted to get out of it, but it gave me a background to start scaling and orienting some of the geometry from. You'll see through this I've needed to make a lot of adjustments in the letter shapes themselves. What you can't see is on the other screen I had both logos from which I was able to manually design geometry from in Blender. Some letters are more inspired by one logo than the other, and you'll be able to recognise which ones are which by how much I changed the design as we go through this short clip. One of the clearest examples of that is the letter P, which you can see me working on. I decided to scale the capital letters as well as move all the letters close to each other, which increased or improved the ability to print or fabricate the item with all the geometry connected together. Once shifting everything together, I turned my attention to the zigzag element underneath the whole logo. That involved creating more pointy ends to each letter in the vertical dimension, as well as starting to think about the way to extrude the zigzag object. I started off on a flat plane extruding edge segments. I quickly realised that in order to keep the offsets between the top line and the bottom line, I thought I would do a thicken or a solidify offset and let the computer decide how far to offset each segment. This meant that this modelling process was made much easier because I was only having to deal with the top line only. You can see that this worked for the most part, except I needed to go in and clean up some of the edges where the profile was going to intersect with itself. Now, because one of the logos, when you look at it on an album cover, it looks like it's got a depth to it, I decided to simulate this depth by shifting the back profile of each extrusion slightly in the negative X and Y. So as you look at it from the front view, it looks like it's forcing a perspective. Like with the bottom zigzag, I had to work out how I could create letters with inset holes in them. So you can see me going and working on the letter O and the combined LA letters, and also making them look a little bit more like a mixture of their precedents as I was tidying it up. Now, using a similar process to the last logo, I did inset features so I could make a distinction between two colour types and just give a bit more depth to the logo itself. And this for now is the end of this modelling session and the last state of the model until I came back to it later in the project. For this next variant I was going for more of a black metal style, using the band Golgoroth as a reference. I chose an old Gothic style, an old English or old German font type, but in retrospect I would have changed it. It looks more like a pirate metal band logo than a black metal band logo. I add some detail later which helps this somewhat, but I might end up updating this in the future. So the modelling approach here, instead of having a background reference image, is to start off with actual font geometry. So I just typed the phrase "now playing" into Blender using a text geometry object, and what you'll see me do doing is trying to offset the edges of the mesh to create the backing plate such that everything can print properly. Because of the detail of the curves of the text, that becomes problematic. So what you're seeing is me trying to overcome the problem by offsetting in different ways, joining in different ways, creating a Boolean subtraction to try and clean up the faces. None of these worked very well, so I ended up having to do more of a manual process of removing small intersected parts. That was quite time consuming, but it gave a better result in the end, and it was the way that I knew how to do it that could give a good result as well, which is quite important. So it was a process of doing a lot of selecting and deleting and turning the vertex snaps on to extrude and join certain faces back together, and from there I was just going through and constraining the selection to the XZ plane and then just moving each edge around to line up with the edges of the text. So after I'd completed this model, I decided that I needed more of a T-shaped pin, and that involved subdividing the front face, subdividing the edges and the vertical so I could have a straight top section and a tapered bottom section. I ended up going back and applying this change to the other two logo variants as well. So these are renders of the 3 final logo variants, each of which can be printed as a solid or in 2 different colours. And in this last render you can see the final change to the black metal variant with some additional elements which aim to mimic dripping paint as if it was spray painted using a stencil on a wall. Surprise, it's me! So because the premise of this channel, and not necessarily this video series, is to actually build a client base and find opportunities to work with others, this is a call out to ask if there's anybody that sees this that wants expert services around reverse engineering, rapid prototyping, 3D modelling in general. Feel free to reach out using the links in the description below. We can have a chat and see if we think we might be able to work together. Back to the video to hand, I've uploaded these to Cults now. This is what they look like. The files are available in a core package for starters, which is the bracket and barrier arm, as well as separate packages for each of the different genre logo types. This means that people can download the core package and not necessarily feel like they have to pay for something that they don't necessarily want. Feel free to go and have a look yourselves. There's no obligation to actually download anything because we want to grow the 3D modelling and 3D printing business venture somewhat independently of any video that I might make. We'll leave these up for a while. We'll see what sort of additional support they might need. Should I advertise them or not? What other networking do they actually require? Are there other social network platforms that I need to investigate and utilise to get these things shared a bit wider? In the future we'll come back to this project and do an assessment on whether or not it's successful. Did it lead to any further downloads and overall portfolio? We'll start to answer questions like that as we go. I'm going to start the next tranche of projects. The first of which is going to be an object called a zoetrope. So on the subject of vinyl records again, a 3D object that you place in the centre of the disc and it looks like it's an animation as you keep your eye on a particular point on it. If that sounds like something that you might want to watch, then watch out for a notification. I will make a post. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.